Hi, Kevin.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Are you staying warm?
Actually, yeah.
That's good.
I been shoveling every day because there's just a dusting out there, but
I know exactly. It's almost, oh, sorry, that's the dog. I'll be right back.
Hello.
good evening.
Howdy, howdy. How we doing?
Doing okay.
Good. Hmm.
Okay, my family is here and hopefully quiet.
My roommates might be stepping around, but
That's the fun of the Zoom meetings is that you get to see pets and kids and
yeah,
partners, everybody.
there will most definitely be a cat at some point.
Well, I'm relatively secluded, so it should be quiet on my end.
Oh, good.
So are your students showing up or gonna join us tonight?
They are, and we were having they're starting to right now. And what we were thinking is that they would introduce themselves. Hi, guys. Introduce themselves and their projects. They're in 4 different teams, so we could let them go in those 4 different groups.
Okay,
But
great.
I think AZ is going to facilitate.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll start the meeting. It is a public meeting if we have a quorum.
We do not.
Okay, so then it'll be a working meeting, planning meeting then.
Yeah.
Um,
Although we have a couple more minutes, maybe you'll have a few more members join you.
yeah, we have people that come when they can. So if you're willing to be patient, we'll give people a few minutes. I know John Moyers was planning on being here. I see Slim.
Yeah. John mentioned I got word from John, Fred, Shannon, Slim, and you, confirmations. So
Yeah, and we don't have all the students joining yet either, so we can wait a few minutes. I like Xander's screen. It's like overhead lights. It's a very like new age vibe. Where are you, Xander?
I'm in the athletic center.
Oh,
Just
okay.
outside the track.
Oh, it's very bright.
Yeah, maybe I'm just under a light. I'm not sure.
all right, may I have a quorum?
Well, we'll let you take over, AZ.
All right.
So we do we 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got 4 here. We need one more.
Oh, my bad. Miscounted. Too many names joining at once. Oh, there's Rob.
Rob, so yeah, we do have a quorum. Are you recording this, AZ?
Yes.
Okay. Are you comfortable that you have everybody you want, Jessica?
Let's see, some people are together.
Do a roll call.
Yeah, and Emma, are
Actually,
other people from your team here?
I know Jack's on. I'm not sure Sherman has made it on yet.
Okay,
Actually,
your
I'm
your
here.
group was going to go last anyway, so.
something that'd be helpful for our minute secretary is if everyone could just put their names in the chat. Especially if you're joining in a group on Zoom, just for minutes to be done easier, that'd be appreciated. Thank you.
Well, we'll start, I guess. It is 6:02. This is a special meeting of the Bristol Planning Commission where we're welcoming Middlebury College J-term students who'll be doing some research for us. It's January 9th and it is 6:02. Next item is to review the agenda. I think it's pretty straightforward. I have nothing to add. Does anybody else have any comments or additions, deletions to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll continue. The next item of business is the introduction of the students with Professor Teets. Is that proper?
Yes, that's fine.
And as I understand it, we were talking earlier, AZ, you'll moderate as well. So we'll take it from there.
Yeah, well, I just want to thank all the students for joining and for putting together these projects. For the Planning Commission members, I thought I would just go over the questions that the students are going to be researching and what was kind of brought up over Planning Commission meetings. Those questions are going to be infill development best practices in increasing density without new builds, infrastructure, specifically wastewater and sewer best practices, and community education best practices. So those were kind of the discussions from Planning Commission meetings distilled into topics for the students. From there, I'll hand it over to Jessica.
And so what we've done is the students signed up for the question that was of the most interest to them. And so we have 4 teams then, and each team is tackling one of those research questions. So what we thought we could do, if this works for the Planning Commission, is that each one of the 4 teams could introduce their question. They could talk a little bit about what they think they're going to do as far as the research process and if they found anything yet. And then they might have some questions for you as far as resources or directions that you might want to go in. We can, AZ thinks that it might be better to take questions at the end, although I guess if they're really specific, right, like clarification questions or something like that, we could do them after each one.
Yeah, I had the agenda split up so we can do the introduction to the presentations, and each of the 4 groups can kind of give an overview. Any specific questions can obviously be asked to clarify those presentations, and then we'll go into discussion of the research projects and have time for any other general questions or any impact or feedback the Planning Commission has as well, just as a discussion.
That sounds great. And AZ, which team were we going to start with? Was it the infill development or do you remember which one we were going to start with?
I think we're going to start off right with infill.
Okay. So can the group that's working on infill unmute yourselves, and AZ is going to facilitate it if you want to share screen so that you can show your notes.
All right. Hey, everybody. We're working to
share the screen.
we're working to show the screen. The message just popped up saying sharing is not turned on.
Okay. So how about while AZ sets that up,
It should be good. I just made
Okay.
you a co-host.
and then also if you could each introduce yourselves, your name and your major.
You could try to
Yeah.
Yeah, while Joe gets that going,
Yeah.
I can start. My name is Isaiah Bennett. I use he, him pronouns. I am a senior here at Middlebury and I study environmental geography. It's a joint major.
My name is Aiden. I'm a junior. I am a joint major in geography and architecture.
I'm Joe. I'm a sophomore and I am majoring in environmental policy.
I'm
Believe-
Xander. I'm Xander. I'm also in this group. I'm a senior majoring in stats and earth science.
And we have one more in our group that I believe is not in the Zoom unless Helena is here. But Helena, who is a geography and economics, I think double major. And also a senior. And
We are
I think
just that.
and we are very close to getting it shared. We had to
A lot of hoops
open
to
up
jump
settings
through.
to allow it to share. So
That's not gonna work.
It should allow you, all participants are allowed to share screens, so.
I think the problem might be on our end with our computer. Not okay. That looks like
That looks much better.
yep. Okay.
Is it working? If not, maybe Xander could share.
I
Oh,
think
yeah, there it goes. There it goes.
Yeah.
We can see it.
Okay.
awesome.
Yeah,
Alright.
so I was gonna do this first part here. So our question is obviously about infill development, and best practices around that. So development that aligns with the goals of creating affordable housing in Bristol, Vermont is kind of what we focus this on. And within that, we were wanted to consider the proximity to the downtown area. So keeping density focused around the downtown Bristol, connecting to town infrastructure and transit, which again is kind of overlapping with another group's question. Maximizing the use of underutilized and underdeveloped residential plots. It's a big thing that we want to consider, and yeah, increasing the efficiency and the process to decrease associated costs. Yeah, and keep it affordable by making it efficient, essentially. This closer. Yeah, and then we're focusing on Bristol, obviously, so we want to consider the geographic context of the town of Bristol. We want to do we have a lot of geography majors in our group, so we're thinking of maybe doing some GIS analysis around Bristol, looking at like what types of lots there are and the vacancy and availability of those types of things, so that we can be looking at infill that's actually likely to happen in Bristol. Yeah.
I have a point to add on to that. So the step 2 is something that I think that we could gain a lot of information from you guys, naturally being the experts in Bristol, because we really want to highlight or aim the direction of our study based on what is relevant to the characteristics of the town of Bristol. So if we're looking mostly at developing in residential lots that are underdeveloped or underutilized, then we can focus the best practices on that sort of development. Or if there happen to be, it seemed to us, based off of our knowledge and research, that there aren't a lot of vacant, empty, large parking lots. So maybe focusing less on that sort of development. So basically looking at Bristol and what your needs are and what your space is like will help us define the scope of our research.
Xander, go ahead.
Cool. Yeah. So now moving on to kind of this third step of our research plan, which is kind of identifying and consulting local experts. So this is kind of a early list of people that we in our group know. So I guess personally, I know Kevin Chu. He's one of my track coaches here at Middlebury, and he also is the director of the Vermont Futures Project, which I'm not sure if you guys have heard about, but they kind of are working with housing in Vermont, and among other things. And then I'm also a stats major, and Alex Lyford is one of the department chairs, I believe. And he's done a lot of work with different community partners. So even though he might not be like a housing expert specifically, I think he might know some people that we can talk to. And then within geography, Bill Hegman could help us with some different GIS related things. Yeah, so kind of just trying to identify people who might be experts in this field through people who we already know is something that's on our mind.
Additionally, we want to get in touch with people who are more experts in the local Bristol field. So naturally, you all, and then others who might be more policy experts in the infill development. So if you all have suggestions of people that we could get in contact to besides your own commission, that would be super helpful. So our step 4 here is to identify successful approaches to infill development in other municipalities similar to Bristol. So this would be kind of a literature review to help gather resources of how other areas have successfully done this. And so we just wrote a couple bullets of some spots in Vermont that have already done similar things. So the first one you're all familiar with, the Bristol co-housing planned unit development. That's probably, I mean, it's definitely the most relevant since it's already been done and it's in Bristol, and it's a great example of how developing on small lots and adding new buildings and renovating old buildings can really help the housing situation. And then Railroad Street housing in Richmond, extension of the street, added high density duplex units. And then example in Montpelier of a similar story, building upward instead of out, increasing the number of housing units. And then the Homes for All Design and Do Toolkit has 5 proposed case studies, which haven't been done, I believe, but they propose a really good framework for how to do this. So that's helpful. And then we'll continue looking into these case studies to kind of gather a knowledge base of how we might want to go about this and suggestions to give you all at the end.
Yeah. Moving forward, our 5th step is to identify codes that are in need of revision in order to sort of streamline infill development and get past some of the bureaucratic hitches that often, I think, make infill development less feasible or just drawn out or more difficult across the board. Before I think getting into all of these, we just want to note, you'll see this note down on at bullet G. These objectives that we outline here, they don't include the updated information from the 2023 zoning modernization that Bristol passed. We weren't able to access that in time for this meeting. We will use this updated information, of course, as we inform and expand our research going forward. But that doesn't reflect, or our bullets above aren't reflective of that information. Regardless, we think it's important to focus code revision on promotion of ADU, PUD, and mobile or tiny home development. We think an increase in the maximum size of ADUs, potentially set as a proportion of the primary building size, could be particularly helpful. We think the removal of a mandate for owners to occupy the primary structure on the property could help streamline development. Additionally, we think relaxation of parking requirements and reduction of minimum lot size could also be beneficial. Also extrapolating, separating the definition of density and lot size itself could help that. These are all, I think, sort of surface level ideas. But you know, we'll as this process expands for us, and as we dive deeper, we'll come across pros, cons, and you know, far more detailed understandings of what each of these bullets might involve. Additionally, if any of you have feedback, have things you want us to prioritize, we would love to hear any and all commentary. Yeah, our sixth step is to compile our findings and suggestions for your commission in the form of either a PowerPoint or story map. We haven't settled on which yet, and possibly do a GIS study given the heavy geography focus in our group, to assess possible sites for infill development, and then present that all to you. Yeah, I guess before we move on, if it's okay with AZ, we just like to get some brief feedback from those of you who are listening in, and then we have some questions for you if that's all right now.
Yeah, I would say ask the questions.
Okay. These are just surface level vague. With regard to housing development overall in the past decade or two, what do you guys see as having worked well for Bristol? What do you think Bristol has struggled with? And if you had to define some sort of insurmountable parameters or obstacles that we would need to work around, or Bristol as a town needs to work around, what would they be?
Good questions. Anyone in the planning commission got anything to say? John?
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of infill development, and I live in the densest part of Bristol, right downtown. So I'm familiar with what it's like and what it means to live in a densely packed place, even here in Vermont. I really, Bristol is ripe. The village is ripe for a lot of ADUs, and we're seeing that already, and more, I think, to come probably. I'm concerned that in Bristol and in Vermont, I think too, but let's keep it on Bristol, that we haven't really considered the impacts of infill development. And I worry that if we do infill development and densification wrong, if we don't do it right, let's say, that we risk making infill development and densification dirty words. And what I mean by that is, if your next door neighbor's building an ADU and does not consider where they put the new noise or where they shine light, where they put parking, where they put the structure itself and how big it is and how it looks into the neighbor's yards, how it relates to the neighbor's houses. All of those things threaten to make the neighbors unhappy with the ADU development. If a builder is not thoughtful and they dump all the noise and all the light from the new ADU into their neighbors' windows or into their neighbors' yards, if they invade their neighbor's privacy, or if their neighbors feel like their privacy is invaded by a towering new structure or what have you, then we really risk alienating people from the societal goal of creating more housing. And as you guys said earlier, having housing, building up or in and not out. So I'd really appreciate any help you might give us to understand how other communities have dealt with these issues of noise, light, parking, overall sort of placement and scale of the infill development. Here in Bristol, and I think in Vermont, ADUs are now virtually unregulated, except for three things: height, setbacks, and whether they have a workable septic situation, a workable septic situation. Beyond that, noise, light, etc., the other things I mentioned are not, there's no way to regulate them that we've been told by the Regional Planning Commission. So I'm interested in what other communities have done across the country that has addressed these potential impacts, and how we make sure that the infill development we invite and in fact urge upon us all is something we can all live with.
I think that's a really valuable point. Thank you. What I'm getting from that, correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm getting from that overall is you want us to, in addition to focusing on how we can encourage general development of ADUs and well, in the sense that we can provide suggestions for Bristol to ease a housing crunch, you're also concerned about, I guess, suggestions for regulations that would make the widespread addition, perhaps, of ADUs palatable for everybody. Does that sound about right?
That's true. It may not be a regulatory approach, although it might be. You know, there are ways to do it, I suppose, different ways of doing it. It might be through regulation or maybe simple encouragement or education. After all, ADUs are often, or as it's written now in Vermont, ADUs are intended to be built by, you know, homeowners on their lot. Homeowners generally are not professional builders and may or may not consider light shed, light pollution, noise pollution, that sort of thing in their plans. And so how is it as a town that we make sure that we don't build a whole bunch of ADUs and then wake up 5 or 10 years down the road and realize nobody's really happy with them because of all the unaddressed issues like light and noise and that sort of thing, that and now is part of the built environment. And it's hard to go back from that. We've had examples in Bristol already of unsuccessful ADU development where nobody's happy with the result. And so what is it we can do, be it regulation or simple pleading or anything in between, that can ensure that we minimize the impact of infill development while having infill development? We want it. I want it.
Good to hear. Yeah, thank you for your feedback.
I mean, there might be best practices, I guess, is what I'm thinking, in other communities. Maybe they've addressed these potential impacts in their regs, and I would love to see some models of that if you could find them.
That'd be awesome.
Great.
We'll see if, I think it would be really interesting. What I'm envisioning from what you're saying is just really finding some of these case studies and then talking to the locals that are living there, either the ones that own the ADUs or the neighbors, to really assess the impact that those developments have had on the community, to try to get a better idea for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, it would help us here in Bristol, probably in any community, to understand if neighbors are going to be, if somebody's going to build ADUs, what do their neighbors immediately right around them feel are the issues the neighbors would like addressed to minimize that impact? Do they have any concerns about that? Maybe not. Maybe they have concerns about light and noise pollution or that sort of thing, or where the thing stands on the neighbor's property. You know, I'd be really interested in seeing what Bristolites' concerns are for the potential impact of infill development, and therefore how we might address that as a planning commission and ensure that their concerns are folded in. Because after all, the exercise here is not just to build as much as possible in any way we can. It's to build it and retain the things we love about our community here in Bristol, any community, I suppose.
Does anybody else have any input for the team?
I do. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
So looking at points B and C, what has Bristol struggled with? I think one of the things we struggle with is our lack of municipal things like sewer. Most everything built in Bristol is built with its own sewer system. We have really good soils and that works, but we don't have an actual sewer system other than for the very downtown area. So that might be something that is an issue. And the other issue is water. I know right now we're not struggling right now with the amount of water we use, but how much water is available that system can absorb with more building. And on point C, this goes back to your GIS and wanting to study. There are whole sections that are right near Bristol. There are areas that are probably just areas you can't build on simply because of the soils, because of the steepness. closest to the river, all kinds of things like that. So those things will probably come up in your research.
Understood. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Anybody else on the commission?
If there's, oh, we got Slim. Slim,
Am I here?
you are here. I see you. I see your hand.
Okay. Well, I was just thinking of under 5C, which is remove mandate for owner to occupy primary structure on property. I think, maybe I'm wrong, my feeling is that that is a condition that most of us would be hesitant to remove. From my point of view, I would prefer to try to keep the community feeling of Bristol by having homeowners on the property and not just be businesses for some perhaps even larger corporate entity, or we wouldn't know. If once that was removed, anybody could own, anybody could put up the ADUs, and I don't think there'd be the same concern for the community nature of our Bristol village. So that one there might be some pushback on, I would think.
That's a
For
great,
me anyway.
yeah, we didn't think of that. Thank you.
I can speak to the like where I found this suggestion. It was talking about like the owner of the property would still be living on the property, but they would be moving into the AUD instead of staying in the main structure, the primary building on the property. So, and the theory behind that was that like for aging, like elderly residents who want to age in place, and they can downsize by moving into an ADU on their property, and then they can rent out the bigger structure.
That sounds fine to me. I'm not sure that's not allowed in I believe it is allowed in our regs. Kevin, would you?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Or AZ?
yeah, the regulations already have their and as long as it's an owner occupied, well, the current regs say owner occupied one family dwelling, but I will send you the updated modernization regs as the ADU regulations changed from the ones that are currently available. And I think once you are able to see those changes, a lot of your questions might be answered. The one thing I'll say is the increasing maximum ADU size, we just decreased it. So I think to propose increasing it would go against what was just voted on by voters.
Fair enough.
So we're thinking and we're talking very informally here, if you will. And I think we want to convey some concerns, the concern about vacant owners, ownership, the concerns about impact to neighbors. Those type of things are obviously concerns that we will wrestle with. But I'm also thinking that we don't want to start talking about limitations on your work as you've presented here, and then further define, like this last example that Slim brought up, as it's further design sounds a whole lot different than what it was initially stated to be. So I think the points that John and Slim and Shannon brought up are excellent. And they're certainly worthy to bring into your work, but hopefully they are not going to change your work or redirect your work, if you will.
Understood.
I've got some input.
Go ahead, Fred.
I'm not sure, I think I know what you might define as the core area, but I've maintained for a little bit that there's property just outside the core area, and I'm not talking about a mile and a half. I'm talking about neighborhood properties where sometimes the zoning is 1 acre today, where I think could be reduced. That might be explored in terms of giving us the opportunity to have more housing built, whether it be apartment units, like a big one that was built on the beginning of Plank Road. Um, Burpee Road represents maybe some opportunities. I think there's peripheral property that we might want to explore that might open some doors, given the fact that the village itself has very few vacant lots available. And that if we really are looking to increase the amount of housing available for people, whether it's affordable or otherwise, um, making sure we have opportunities outside that village area. That's my 2 cents worth.
Totally.
And
So
that's,
are you saying still within like a 1.5 mile radius, or even outside of that, like mile outside of the center of town?
Well, I guess I'd have to see, well, where is a mile? But
Sure.
I think a mile and a half, maybe max, if we're trying to keep things centered. I mean, villages grew up the way they did because everyone didn't have $30,000 cars to get here, there, and everywhere. And of course, things have changed. And I have more objection to the people that build a $2 million shack up on a mountain somewhere.
Right.
When you talk about sprawl, I have less of a problem of someone putting a 10-unit apartment building or something like that in an area where it was well planned and well done, and it's relatively close to the village area where you have opportunities for affordable housing and otherwise. And so, zoning has been a very big detriment to Vermont and maybe other areas, but certainly Vermont in terms of building. The number of hoops that one has to go through to get a permit, Act 250, which they're trying to work on, not aside. And I think there are opportunities just outside some of these historic village areas that might represent opportunities. And I forget whom it was. I think it was Shannon that mentioned that Bristol does have a big disadvantage even in that because our community water system doesn't necessarily expand to all those areas. And whether it could be expanded or not is a question. And we don't have a municipal sewer system. And the further you get out of the village area where the soils are very welcoming to perking, there's limits, but still very, very welcoming to perking. You may have opportunities where you can't put a 6-unit apartment building because it's not going to handle a sewer system. And that is a disability that we have. Some people might view it as not a disability in terms of what can happen and what doesn't happen, but it's certainly a factor.
thank you. And to kind of provide some background to some of Fred's comments, we just went through a review of housing that was led by the Addison County Regional Planning Commission, and it was solely focused on what we call the village planning area, which is pretty much the town proper. And a lot of thought with this current exercise that we're doing and engaging with you is, to Fred's point, is maybe there's opportunities outside of what's traditionally the village planning area, even though the strategy now is to densify existing densely occupied areas. So I think that's a good point, that we don't want to contain your analysis within what you're capable of doing through your term, to look at stuff that in this case, outside the box is outside the planning area.
Fair enough. I like it.
Any other feedback from the planning commission members before we move on to the next group? John?
Just a quick comment to echo Slim and his concern there. I think, nationally, we're seeing the number one purchasers of single family homes are hedge funds and large investment corporations, and they then put those into the rental market. And individuals are losing the opportunity to own their own homes in that way. And we don't want that happening here in Vermont. If it hasn't happened already, I don't know, but so keeping an eye out for anything that would leave an opening for that, I think would be something to be alert to as you make your recommendations.
Good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. The next group we're going to have up is going to be the best practices in increasing density without new builds. So whoever's group is. And I think we'll follow the model of that past group where at the end of your presentation, there's room for questions, and then we'll just do a brief feedback based off if you have any feedback questions, and try to get each person from the Planning Commission to give a brief just feedback.
Who's presenting for the second group? Is that you, Callie? Okay.
Yeah, I was just unmuting. I'm Callie. I'm a senior political science and English major, and I'm a member of this group. There are a couple others that might unmute right now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alden. I'm a junior Feb, and I'm a political science major.
Hi, everyone. I'm Madison. I'm also a junior Feb and also a political science major.
And I'm Elion. I'm a senior Feb and I'm an architecture major.
And then, are any of my group members able to screen share? Just having difficulties with mine.
All participants again should be able to share.
Is anyone else able to help, or you can email the document to, oh, there we go.
Is everyone seeing it?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Awesome. Then without further ado, I'll kind of give us a brief overview, an introduction to what we'll be doing in this group. So to reiterate, our overarching question here is how can we increase housing density in Bristol without new builds, kind of different than what the last group is doing. But first, I'll list off our research questions that we've prepared. The first being, what changes can we make to Bristol zoning regulations to encourage residents to take advantage of opportunities to add ADUs and or rehab older houses into mixed housing in their communities? The second kind of looks into funding options, whether those are local, state, and federal. So we're looking at how we could maximize the results of potentially limited local funding, and then look into what existing state and federal programs might exist with a specific focus on increasing housing density. And then finally, we're looking at how can we best structure our approach toward incentivizing individuals and contractors to provide new varied housing out of existing single-family homes. So a little bit of overview on Bristol's housing landscape, which I won't belabor too much, assuming that this is familiar to a lot of people on the commission, but two kind of predominant demographic trends we observed in the population and the housing stock was that one, Bristol has an aging population. The median age has increased pretty steadily, and the largest component of Bristol's population is within the baby boomer generation. So what we see is that these aging community members might have different needs, whether that's assistive services, downsizing, or help maintaining homes and fronting the costs of their homes. At the same time, we see that there are shrinking household sizes. While the number that we have down of 2.71 to 2.45 in the past 2 decades might not seem huge, we see generally a trend towards smaller family units, which means that more housing units are in demand. So the overarching issues we see here are that as median housing costs are on the rise, there's this growing gap between the amount of homes in demand and how many people are demanding these. And then just a couple kind of statistics or data points that we found useful in our initial research, which some commission members have talked about, is obviously the village planning area is the most highly dense area in Bristol and is where we're looking at increasing density, having 47% of housing units in this specific area. Interestingly, 2017 census data found that about 69% of all housing units in Bristol are detached single family, and about half of those are 3-bedroom homes. So we were thinking there's potentially some room there to see if these are meeting the needs of both the current occupants and people who might be interested into moving into these spaces if they were to be adaptively reused or converted into multiple family homes. And generally, we see a low vacancy rate in Bristol, where from 2010 to 2018, there have been 29 new housing units, which is great. But then we see at the same time an increase of 102 households, which is hard to account for. So just returning to our initial question, why is this important? I think we have a focus on sustainability, maintaining Bristol's historic charm, and kind of maintaining an engaged community, which is why we're looking at this village planning area and seeking to increase density there.
And then I'll go over some potential solutions. So we already talked about ADUs with the previous group, but they're smaller independent dwelling units that are located on the same lot as an existing single family home, but they don't have to be a separate kind of building. They can be, a converted garage or attached to a primary home, so you can build onto a home. And then in terms of zoning, so the state of Vermont requires that all municipalities cannot block homeowners from building an ADU as long as they meet a certain criteria, which is obviously the wastewater infrastructure. And then it cannot be larger than 30% of the livable area in the primary home, or 900 square feet, whichever one is greater. And then obviously they can't be built in flood hazard areas or fluvial erosion zones. And then my understanding is that all the ADUs have to meet the town's, or if we're talking about Bristol, the town's setback coverage and parking requirements. And then we were curious about some incentives to help ADUs kind of be built. And we looked at the VHIP 2.0 program, which offers up to $50,000 for homeowners to receive to build an ADU, but however, they do have to match 20% of that. So let's say you receive 50,000, you would have to match $10,000, which is a quite, it's a large upfront investment that some homeowners may not be willing to make. And then on top of that, you have to charge below at or below HUD fair market rent for 5 or 10 years based on the agreement when you receive that money. And then just the landlord stuff, like watching the landlord tenant mediation video, and then the fair housing training. But overall, like through ADUs, landlords can have a steady income and also contribute to the community with the housing that they offer. And then in terms of questions, I think we agreed upon doing these at the end. So I'll bring those up again later.
Hi, I'll be talking about our second solution to increasing density without new builds, which is transforming single-family homes into community homes. And I was kind of researching whether or not Bristol had anything like this, and I found the Bristol Co-housing Village, which I'm sure you guys are all familiar with. I guess a slight variation is that the Bristol Co-housing Village serves as a planned unit development, also known as a PUD, where a housing community combines different types of properties with shared amenities, which I guess is a slight variation or slight difference from the traditional definition of a community home. But we want to kind of look into how the Bristol Village Co-housing was able to convert an existing colonial house into a duplex with 2 large townhouse style living space with 2 or 3 bedroom units. we thought this might be helpful in terms of what were some of the challenges and successes in this project, and especially challenges in terms of regulation and inspection and successes in terms of just how this has increased the affordability of housing in the area as well. Another thing we wanted to look into was the financial details of this project and whether or not this was a private developer's initiative or if the town was heavily involved with the project, so kind of private versus public funding as well, or whether or not there was a big public or private cooperation or partnership in this project. We thought when also looking into this solution, it'd be important to research the cost of renovation, given that it is oftentimes cheaper to tear down and rebuild a new house when comparing that to, let's say, renovating an existing house, given that there's a lot of high labor and material costs, potentially unforeseen issues during demolition, including plumbing problems and structural damage, especially if the house is really old. We also want to learn more about the numerous inspections and permits. For instance, I was talking about the Bristol Co-housing Village and some of the inspections and permits perhaps they experience, but what this may entail and how this serves as a barrier to those who may want to take the initiative to build these certain co-housing villages. Additionally, there's recently a Forbes article on how it may be easier and cheaper to convert office buildings to co-living spaces in comparison to traditional one-bedroom or studio apartments. And the reason why this may potentially be easier or financially cheaper is because co-living spaces can better leverage the existing office layout better, for instance, with shared kitchens, shared bathrooms, and more open space. So perhaps looking into whether or not this is even a feasible option. And should I save my questions for the end or? Okay, and then I'll come back to the questions at the end too as well.
All right, and then I've got kind of the third potential solution, which is looking at how can we make better use of currently either unused spaces or spaces that are being used for something other than residential units. So we were hoping that we might be able to find, there's precedent for state funding of kind of rehabilitation of foreclosed and abandoned homes. Unfortunately, it seems that's not super applicable to Bristol just because there's not much of that in stock. But we also looked into kind of what Madison was starting to touch on, transforming commercial spaces. So retail, office, even places like barns. And I looked a little bit more into the VHIP program that Alden brought up earlier in relation to the ADUs. And the language isn't super clear, but it seems like there's an avenue for, I think it says like adding units to an existing structure. So looking down that road more and seeing if that can apply to transitioning from commercial to residential in the downtown area. But as we're doing that, I think the first question is, do these spaces, unused spaces or spaces that we can afford to lose commercial space, do they exist in Bristol? And then from there, looking into kind of zoning limitations and regulations that differ between commercial and residential spaces, and then also meeting with some of the owners of these spaces and seeing what reservations they might have, why they haven't chosen to do this before, and what we could do to make it more appealing to take advantage of this federal funding that's currently being offered.
I think we're missing our fifth person, I believe.
I think, yeah, it doesn't look like Addie's on the call. So maybe you just want to turn it over. Oh, wait. Addie
She's here,
said
tech isn't working.
Right. Could someone read her questions?
Yeah, I guess I could read the methodologies and next steps. I guess one of the steps we wanted to take is just speaking to residents and facilitating a community service or survey regarding common barriers to implementing mentioned housing solutions, as well as being able to kind of gauge community sentiment on whether or not they'd be open to some of the solutions we had recommended, for instance, ADUs and community homes. as well as some of their concerns in terms of what this may look like and perhaps how this may impact their lifestyle. Additionally, we aim to collaborate with the education outreach group too, as I mentioned in my section. Just perhaps engaging individuals, particular older adults who might be open to downsizing from a larger home and kind of the role education and the outreach group may play in that, as well as proposed changes could, as well as the fact whether or not proposed changes could look different if problem is money versus labor.
I can step in here. That's my note taking. Essentially just gauging what barriers residents identify, because our solutions will look different if it's a financial problem versus if it's just overwhelming to take on that kind of project. So get a real sense of what the homeowners, property owners are identifying as the most prevalent barriers before we go and try to solve a problem that might actually not be the biggest concern. Yeah. And then looking into, sorry, you can go ahead, Madison.
I guess also looking and researching other Vermont towns with high density villages and gathered data on the housing types that are present in their neighborhoods and if they're effective or not effective in some of the similar projects they'd implemented into their town. And we also aim to meet with committee members to discuss some of the questions that we have, which we will now dive into. Does someone want to cover the questions part?
Yeah, so I think
we could probably just leave them up on the screen and go ahead and see if planning commission members wanted to respond to them. I'm just looking at the time. So we only have like 35 more minutes to do the other two groups.
My idea also is for this group and the remaining of the groups, if you could have your questions sent to me in an email and I can send that out to the planning commission, and that way we can get a more detailed response from each planning commission member and they can have some time to sit with the questions and think them over, and then we can get those back to you if that sounds all right with the planning commission and the other two groups. Brad?
I just wanted to answer Madison's question concerning whether the successful development on Firehouse Lane was private or public, and it was definitely public. There was a significant amount of federal and state money that went into it. They're primarily affordable housing units. I think not primarily, I think entirely. There are several units that are dedicated to formerly homeless people, and they many of them have to be perpetually affordable. With those rules, the dollars and credits that were made that were accessible to the Addison County, I think it's the Addison County Community Trust, which is a big housing organization in Middlebury for the county, was able to access funding that made attractive units available for people with more modest means. And affordable in Vermont is 80% of the median income or less. And many of those units are less than that. So it's very much a planned thing that couldn't have been developed the way it is, I don't think, at the price tag it was without public dollars involved. And there's many examples like that. The senior citizen housing we have in Bristol at the end of Mountain Street was also part of a Addison County Community Trust project. The 240 units in Middlebury that is proposed, which you may have heard about out, I think, on the extension of Seminary Street, is also going to be involved with a lot of public money as well in order to make things more reasonable economically. Whereas private developers don't have those same restrictions and can charge market rates. And there's been a real push for affordability in a lot of the housing developments.
So if you haven't contacted or added community trust, or they might actually be called Housing Works. They are well versed in affordable housing and strategies in Addison County and Bristol.
And their executive director was actually a Middlebury graduate. So we'll be speaking with her. And they have renamed themselves as Addison Housing Works. So it's a little bit confusing because if you read older documents, they have a different name.
Yeah, Addison, I do a lot of work with Addison Housing Work. I was actually just there doing an inspection. But again, as I said before, we'll have the questions collected and sent out to the Planning Commission so that everyone can give their full information. And so we can get the last two presentations through, just so the Planning Commission can hear the research questions and what your solutions are so far. And then any questions we can get rolling. John.
Yeah, just on those last two presentations, I think you do well to focus on Bristol co-housing, because that's, in my mind, the best use of 3 acres of prime downtown space, lots where they really thought hard about how to make it fit and work well in that particular location. So the Mendells, who were two of the motivating forces in that, really are available, I think, and would love to talk with you. I'd offer myself, if for the folks interested in adaptive reuse or converting, creating new housing out of existing buildings, I'd offer myself. That's what I've been doing in downtown Bristol for about 20 years, or attempting to. And there's a lot that could be done, and I'd urge you to look at how to make the space above the retail stores on Main Street more habitable, bring them up from substandard housing to standard housing, and or make some of them more readily available for housing where they're not now because of their state of condition. And anyway, that'd be a worthwhile investigation as well.
Thank you, John. All right, let's move on to the third group, infrastructure best practices. Whoever is in that group.
Yeah, hi, my name is Jack Dyer. I'm a first year undecided on the major, and I'm working in the wastewater best practices group.
Hi, I'm Emma McNeely. I'm also first year, so also undecided, and also part of that group.
Hi, I'm Sherman. I'm a junior. I'm a computer science major and a political science minor.
Can you all see the screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm going to start by talking about our main research questions, which are what infrastructure is already in place in Bristol and the surrounding areas, and what are some problems facing the use and maintenance of said infrastructure? So essentially, what's already there? Can it handle an increase in housing? Would it be possible to expand that system to reach outside? I know right now it's just serving the small downtown area. So would that be able to reach out to more private homes? And then if it's not possible to get on the public system, what is the process like for building new private septic systems? How are ways that can be affordable and efficient? And then, so that second question there is, just how can rural communities and people trying to move in, or new affordable housing projects, how would they be able to have affordable and reasonable access to wastewater management? So
Yeah.
for that, go ahead.
Wait, go ahead. Moving on a bit to solutions and potential cases, and obviously a big part of this comes hand in hand with some of what the other groups are working on as for like what type of housing developments we're looking at specifically. So for example, you might know like mobile homes, that has a different set of regulations for connecting to a municipal septic system than say we're trying to build a huge apartment complex or even a single family home. So that's definitely going to be a big part of it. And there have been some cases in the past, such as with Warren, Vermont, where they were able to complete a full community wastewater system and development. But in the case of Warren and places like Wolcott, they didn't necessarily have a preceding municipal system in place. And so there are definitely some comparisons to be made with Bristol, where you have that, again, only serving the downtown, but you have some form of a public system. But tying into that, one big part of Bristol is the fact that for affordable housing and additional housing developments to be created, you very likely need to address wastewater treatment, because right now, and we're going to be talking, I think Professor Teets just added this chat, but we're going to be talking with Jill Marzano for more details on this front. But if we're to build a wastewater, or maybe is building a wastewater treatment system, what needs to be done in order to support further developments, because obviously that can hamper or completely halt developments. But so, yeah, that kind of ties in with our next steps. Is we have a list of people we want to talk to just try and figure out, first of all, if we're talking about infrastructure behind wastewater and septic, what are the developments that are most crucial and most feasible, and how does that then become affected by, again, the regulations or processes that go into creating those systems. But if any of my other groupmates want to talk more about future steps or experts, please feel free.
Yeah, so I'm happy to chime in there. So our work process here, moving along, we're going to talk to, like Emma mentioned, to some various experts to see, just to garner some information about, just to, obviously learn a little bit more about wastewater infrastructure and whatnot. And then a lot of our first infrastructure question about how the system is doing right now, what it's going to be able to handle for more, with more building in the future. A lot of that can be answered in the wastewater report that we found online. So we're definitely going to rely heavily on that to get a really good picture about just the current state of the systems.
Everyone with this part, the fourth part.
Yeah, Sherman, you want to take away?
Oh, yeah. So we have some questions for the PC. So the first question will be that what are some major problems facing the wastewater management system right now? So we read the online report, and it mentions like the problem with the BOD. I think that's the only significant one right now. So like we don't know if there's any other significant problems facing the wastewater treatment facility right now. And then does our research questions capture the major concerns of the town? And then secondly, we would need to do more research on the possible solutions for expanding wastewater management in Bristol. But are there any significant improvement plans already in place? So I think we've broken down the improvement plan a little bit in the research questions. So we mentioned prioritizing affordable housing within municipal wastewater system. We also mentioned connecting manufactured housing communities to the town system and on-site wastewater treatment for individual homes. And then we mentioned decentralized systems for communities such as anaerobic digesters. And lastly, we mentioned community awareness education programs. So I was wondering if there are any significant improvement plans in place, especially relating to the plans that I just mentioned. And then lastly, anything else missing in the research proposal? If the PC can answer these questions, it would be great.
If I could just jump in, Professor Teets, you may be more aware of this or not, but Valerie our former town administrator has a vast amount of knowledge, as well as the Marsanos who operate the system, with options of what should happen with that existing system. So I don't know if it would be appropriate to pulse her, or if we should do that as a within the town outreach to her, or what, or if that's even something we should be thinking about.
Well, maybe we could start with talking with Jill and then see if she would, if she thinks that talking to Valerie also would be good, or if Jill feels like she's able to cover that.
Okay, fair.
We hate to bother her in her retirement, but I'm sure she'd be happy to talk to the students if Jill thinks it's a good idea.
Yeah, I understand that, and I had a reservation about bringing it up, but she is a credible resource.
Yeah, and I'm sure she'd be happy to, but maybe we could talk to Jill first and then see what we might need from Valerie. Okay, should we move on to the last group then?
I was just about to say, yeah. And I can try to answer any questions the best I can. I worked with Valerie on some beginnings of projects and have looked
Yeah,
into the cap.
I've already told all 4 groups to contact you after this meeting, so you're going
Yes.
to be meeting with everyone.
Yes. All right, the last group we will be doing community education best practices.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Matheson. I'm a political science major, and I wanted to thank the commission for having us and giving students the opportunity to engage with a bit of the real world and more practical side of things that we don't often get. My team has 2 members, and I'd like to invite them to introduce themselves.
My name is Hugh Hutchinson. I'm a junior and a religion major.
I'm Riley. I'm a sophomore, and I'm a political science and statistics double major. Okay, so we are focusing on 2 questions for community education. So what are the main concerns that residents have with building new developments in Bristol, and how can we address these concerns, and try to minimize the impacts that they have, and ensure that people are educated about the effects that these developments will have.
Yeah, and so our research so far has been mostly on what the concerns of residents might be around Vermont more generally, and specifically Addison County, from an Addison County Regional Housing Survey. And we've also kind of discovered a little bit of what developers in other regions of Vermont have done in order to engage with communities who are opposed to new housing developments. And so most of the opposition, from what we've found, has been based off of aesthetics and kind of like the character of neighborhoods. And from everything we've read so far, and just the conversations today, it kind of seems like the Vermont communities have a very like heavy value in the character of their community. And so we want to kind of explore how we can kind of help communities see how affordable housing can kind of fit into that character. And so the moving on, the 2023 Addison County Regional Housing Survey shows that only about 1/5 of residents oppose building new housing in village centers. And so the survey also reveals that village centers are favored for new developments. Specifically, individuals who live outside of the village centers are looking to move closer to village centers more generally. And it also reveals that there is one type of housing that respondents were more hesitant about, and that's mobile homes. We saw that they were, the respondents were about evenly split on the need for more mobile homes. And so perhaps exploring how we can like deconstruct maybe stigmas or preconceptions about these types of housing options could be helpful. And then for examples of developers who have taken on kind of opposition to these projects, in the Arts District in Burlington, originally some local residents had successfully blocked a housing development. They came back and proposed a new development, which was slightly outside the neighborhood, and then they engaged with the community through Q&A sessions, interactive maps, with the potential project, and they also immerse themselves in the community, going to community events such as like farmers markets. And so we were hopefully going to reach out to some of the developers in Burlington that were successful in engaging with these communities who opposed the developments. And I've also already reached out to some local community leaders who are involved in housing and trying to get a gauge on what some of the best practices might be for educating people on affordable housing in their neighborhoods.
Then the next area we had, which is effective education and community education, which we broke down into 3 points. One is effective communication, especially for people who are highly educated on a field, can often have a disparity between how much they know versus how much they assume that their audience knows. My grandfather says that it's deceptively intuitive when you hear effective ways to communicate. But we're looking at things like the Dale Carnegie Foundation, George Orwell, as well as people that have spent time studying effective organizational communication on what is the best way to craft messages that are easy to understand and keep people engaged. Along with this is coalition building and consensus building is what is important when you are educating a community about what you're doing, is also allowing them to take part in the policy process and the development process, because this gives them a chance to feel like their ideas and their concerns are being integrated in with the change makers, which allows them to learn about the process while the policy is being developed, and allowing for the simultaneous education and development means that you generally are able to educate the people that have the strongest opinions within the community before you get to final steps and push out a major policy. The last one that we're focusing on is educating people about current resources and programs, which, to take a couple anecdotes from my home state, California, my hometown, is about 5-6 years ago, there was about $1 billion in state and private funds for housing that went unused or underapplied for because people simply didn't know those programs existed or available for them. Similarly, my town did a grant program for new businesses where they'd give up to $50,000 in grant money, in which they only received 2 applications because they didn't properly advertise the resources. So educating people about current resources and programs can be just as important as developing new programs, given if we are lacking in education of what's currently happening, it is unlikely that people will be aware of future developments, if that makes sense. I think that covers most of the research areas briefly. The last thing I'll say, and some feedback we were hoping to get from the commission, was we were given relatively a broad topic of community education, and we've narrowed it down to these subpoints of how to be effective in education and what types of education we're looking at. And we wanted to make sure that our narrowing was in line with what you guys were hoping to get a closer look at.
Okay, then looking ahead to next steps. First, just to, we don't live in Bristol, and obviously you guys do, so you're much more familiar with the community, and we'd love to talk to as many people as possible, stretching from elected representatives, obviously the Planning Commission, and various community leaders and residents, just to get complete scope of opinions and find out what people think about the housing situation, and just have conversations with them, and as well as local housing aspects. I believe Elise was mentioned earlier in the presentation, but she seems like a very good resource for us to reach out to. We will also be continuing our research into how we can effectively communicate and create an educational platform, and trying to think about how we do so. I think the info group talked about GIS and like a lot of visualizations, and I think that could be a useful thing that we could implement, given that housing is a very tangible physical thing for people, and that people like to see not just conceptual ideas but like kind of practical applications. And then like the other groups will share our initial findings on the 21st, I believe, and then a final report, and then just some questions that we have, just kind of how, like, have residents raised significant concerns about any developments in the past? If so, what are they? And then we've looked into local concerns around the state, but if there's anything that's really specific to Bristol that we should be aware of, that would be great to know.
Great, thank you. I think those are great questions. But looking at the time, I do want to respect any other obligations people have tonight. But I thought maybe the Planning Commission just briefly could, in my summary of the presentations, kind of get if there's any Planning Commission feedback that is jumping out at folks if they want to give. I think we have a little bit of time for that.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely overlap, and I would hope that everybody is sharing data between the groups as well, especially when you start getting into the GIS analysis and spatial analysis of what's available, what's open land used, how it's used, etc., because there is some overlap there. And definitely with all of these categories, costs are one thing that come down to being a big factor, whether it be the wastewater or redevelopment or new build or anything else, especially with the wastewater, which is one of the reasons why that's as limited as it is, because of the enormous costs to have the capacity for the entire town, which is where you would get into alternative solutions, decentralized systems, things like that. There's all sorts of things, but I just wanted to get that out there. And then as far as communication, one of the things that we've struggled with in the past has been not only how to craft that communication, but the vehicle for that in order to get a large enough response that it even seems worthwhile.
Thanks, Rob.
Yep.
Anybody else? Slim? Any closing thoughts?
Just thank you very much for doing all this, and it sounded really good. It'll be very helpful, I'm sure. So thank you.
John?
Yeah, I think just talking about communications and what's at stake and getting people involved, I think I found that helping people understand, in their language and in their context, what's at stake when the rules are one way versus another way, the regs are one way versus another way. What does it mean if their neighbor builds this or their adjacent property owner builds that? Do they get a say? Do they get a commentary? I found people generally supportive of people doing with their land what they want, as long as, they're considerate of the neighbors. And helping the neighbors, helping everybody understand what's at stake in zoning is a big challenge, because zoning is based on regulations that are often feel impenetrable. And I've delved in them a lot. I'm still a layperson, and they're still confusing to me, you know, over many years. And so people don't always understand that this version of language means this is how it could impact you versus a different version of an approach to creating or regulating development, you know, could have this real impact on you. So to whatever extent you can explain that to people, translate that, would be helpful.
Thanks. Shannon, any closing thoughts?
Just want to say thank you, and I'm really looking forward to what you guys come up with and find out, and I'm looking forward to working with you in that process. Thank you.
Thanks. Fred?
Think
We still have Fred here or not?
I think he might have disappeared.
Okay. So I'm very, first off, thank you very much for doing this. We're really excited to have an independent view and an open view. I'm really excited about these presentations. I think they're all great. I think you've given it a lot of thought, and I'm really excited to see what you come up with. I guess one question, I don't know if the outlines can be distributed to the Planning Commission, or if that was already in the plan, but that would be great to have those and put them before everybody, along with the questions, as AZ had said. You know, we went through a lot of information tonight, and at least for me, it doesn't always stick the first time around. So any of that paperwork that you could provide us with, if you're willing, would be great. And again, thank you so much for taking on this task and helping us with it.
And so we'll reach out to each one of the teams. Will reach out to AZ after this meeting, and they'll share their documents. But also, I think they'd like to talk to you.
Yeah. I also would just like to reiterate what Kevin's saying. Just like, thank you very much. It's very exciting to see other people excited about urban planning and policy, and how do we do development in a way that is best for everyone. And yes, please send me your questions. I would love to talk for hours if you are willing. You might open Pandora's box. But for all groups, if you send me your outline, I will send you the finalized modernization regulations, so you have the most up to date. And that sounds like a good trade to me.
That is good. And then what we'll be doing is we're going to be working, so we'll be workshopping what we find and talking with each other. And then we plan to present on the 21st our interim findings. So that will be more developed than what this is, but still there will be space for you to shape things or turn things in certain directions or pose new questions before we present you with our final research findings on the 30th.
I have, you guys have a big section of the upcoming 21st meeting, so we can really get into the nitty gritty. And for the rest of the Planning Commission, you will also be getting an email from me about the January 30th meeting. I've booked the conference room, so it'll be very exciting to see so many people in one space.
Oh, so this will be in person?
Unless you want to do presentations over Zoom. But
I prefer in person. That's exciting.
Yeah, I thought it would be, and then of course it will be hybrid remote as open meeting law requires, but thought it'd be good and good practice to do presentations as well.
Right. Plus my students all want to come to Bristol.
Yeah.
Explore our downtown.
Ooh, maybe we can get some Bristol bucks for them.
Yeah, there we go.
Cool. Are there any questions lingering from any of the students or any of the Planning Commission members before? And for your docs, if you will email those, I'll put my email in the chat. If you'll email those to me, that'd be awesome. And then when you email me, just put your group name, like who's in your group and all that fun stuff, so I can keep track.
Well, great. Well, thanks again. Not hearing any more questions or comments as far as this meeting is concerned, we'll move on to the next item, which is public comment. Not sure we have any public here to comment tonight. And the next thing is to adjourn. And I don't know, John.
Second.
Moving to
Okay, all in favor? Anybody
Aye.
opposed? Anybody going to abstain? Okay, it's a wrap. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
good project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.